The ballrooms of London run on two currencies, old money and older cruelty. When the Duke of Blackwood announced he was marrying a workhouse clerk, his family laughed behind their fans. They assumed she would wilt. They assumed the weight of 1,000 years of pedigree would crush her flat. They waited, quite comfortably, for her to break. They had never met a woman raised on nothing at all. This is the story of how the laughter died. The laughter started in the drawing room of Blackwood House, sudden and sharp as a dropped teacup. Dowager Duchess Cordelia sat rigid on her chaise, one gloved hand pressed to her collarbone, her eyes entirely without warmth despite the smile fixed on her mouth. "Darling," she said, dabbing at the corner of her lips with a lace handkerchief. "You always did have the most peculiar sense of humor. A workhouse clerk. Truly." Gabriel Thorne, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, did not smile. He stood near the cold hearth, arms crossed, a man who had spent 6 years hauling his family's crumbling estates back from the edge of ruin with nothing but stubbornness and arithmetic. "It isn't a jest, Mother," he said. "Eliza and I marry at the end of the month. You'll see to the arrangements." Beside him, Eliza Winters stood perfectly still in a grey wool dress mended twice at the cuffs, in a room dripping with gilt mirrors and imported silk. She was aware, entirely out of place. She had expected exactly this reaction, and had spent the carriage ride over rehearsing the particular stillness that kept her chin level and her hands from shaking. She felt the eyes of Gabriel's younger siblings settle on her like weight. Lord Peter, lounging near the window with a brandy he'd poured without asking, snorted openly. Lady Beatrice, seated at the pianoforte, hid a sneer behind her sheet music. Eliza had grown up scrubbing stone floors at St. Agnes's parish home. She knew precisely what the aristocracy saw when they looked at her: dirt, charity, an insult to good breeding. She had come prepared for it. She had spent the last 3 years as a bookkeeper and companion to Gabriel's reclusive aunt in Sussex. It was there he'd found her, not by noticing her face first, but her ledgers, the way she'd quietly turned the old woman's chaotic finances into something orderly and sound. He needed a duchess who could run an estate rather than merely decorate it. Eliza needed a roof that didn't leak and a life that didn't hinge on the next missed wage. It was, on both sides, a transaction. Nothing more. "You cannot be serious," Cordelia said, rising in a rustle of lavender silk. "You are the Duke of Blackwood. You have obligations. You cannot marry her. Does she even have a surname?" "Winters," Eliza said. It was the first time she'd spoken since entering the room, her voice calm and pitched to carry without effort. "The parish gave it to me." Peter took a slow sip of his brandy. "How charming. Does she know which fork to use for the fish course, or do they eat with their hands where she comes from?" "Peter," Gabriel warned, an edge entering his voice. "It's a fair question," Eliza said smoothly, before Gabriel could intervene further. She turned her dark eyes on Peter. "We used wooden spoons at the parish, my lord. They don't tarnish, and they rarely snap under pressure. A pity the same can't be said of certain gentlemen of the ton." The room went very still. Peter's jaw tightened. Beatrice gasped softly, fingers faltering on the keys. Cordelia's eyes narrowed into slits. Gabriel's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile, there and gone before anyone but Eliza caught it. "She is entirely unsuitable," Cordelia hissed, turning her back on Eliza to address her son directly. "Society will tear her apart. Almac's patronesses will cut her dead within a week." "This family was a laughingstock," Gabriel replied evenly, "when father left us £90,000 in debt and a stable of unsellable racehorses. I fixed that. I'll marry whom I choose." "You think you're saving her," Cordelia said, voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You're throwing a lamb to wolves, Gabriel. She won't survive a single season." Eliza watched the dowager's face and saw, beneath the aristocratic fury, something closer to fear, the terror of a woman whose entire social currency depended on the Blackwood name remaining untouchable and unthreatened by someone who didn't need her approval to exist. "I'll take my chances with the wolves, Your Grace," Eliza said quietly. Cordelia looked her up and down with open disgust. "You don't even know what teeth look like, my dear." They left the drawing room 10 minutes later. In the cooler air of the corridor, Eliza let out a slow breath. "Are you well?" Gabriel asked. He didn't offer his arm. She noted, with something like relief, that he understood she wasn't looking for gentle comfort. Your mother intends to destroy me, Eliza said. Merely an observation. Yes. She'll try. Peter will try to humiliate you. Beatrice will orchestrate whispers. Gabriel studied her. If you wish to withdraw, Eliza, I'll settle a pension on you and arrange a carriage. No one would blame you. Eliza glanced back at the closed drawing room doors, hearing the muffled, furious voices still arguing inside. She thought of the cold winters at St. Agnes's, the particular ache of real hunger, the specific, grinding feeling of being disposable to everyone who'd ever had power over her. I'm not leaving, she said. But you should tell your mother to cancel whatever monstrosity she's planning for my bridal wardrobe. If I'm to be a duchess, I refuse to look like a victim. The 3 weeks before the wedding became a masterclass in quiet warfare. Cordelia did not shout. She weaponized etiquette instead, seizing control of Eliza's trousseau under the guise of duty, subjecting her to hours on a fitting stool while the dowager directed a small army of modistes. Not the sapphire silk, Cordelia drawled, waving it away. Miss Winters has such a sallow complexion. The mustard velvet, I think. Heavy. With a great deal of lace, to distract from those shoulders. Peasant stock, one assumes. Eliza stared straight ahead at the wallpaper while the seamstress pinned mustard velvet that would make her look, deliberately, like an oversized ottoman. That, she understood, was precisely the point. Cordelia wanted the whole of society laughing at her on sight. Eliza let her buy the fabric. She had other plans. In the evenings, rather than retire to her assigned rooms, Eliza descended to the servants' quarters. The aristocracy treated staff as furniture. Eliza knew they were the actual blood of the household. On her 4th night, she walked into the kitchens. The room went silent. The cook, an imposing woman named Mrs. Aldridge, dropped her cleaver with a thud. Miss Winters, are you lost? Not at all, Eliza said, crossing to the stove. I came to look at the household ledger. I noticed the bread had a bitter edge to it yesterday. Your miller's cutting the grain with chalk dust. If you switch to the mill on Cutler's Row, you'll get a finer grind for less coin. Mrs. Aldridge's arms uncrossed slowly. You know grease traps too, I suppose. I scrubbed them for years, Eliza said, without a trace of shame. I know lye burns your knuckles, and I know a good cook is the only thing standing between a house this size and open rebellion. Let me fix your supplier. By the 2nd week, Eliza had quietly won the war below stairs. The staff, having watched Beatrice conveniently forget to pass her the salt at dinner and overheard Peter's drunken mockery in the halls, retaliated in the only ways available to them. Beatrice's tea arrived permanently lukewarm. Peter's boots, always polished, mysteriously pinched. 2 days before the wedding, Cordelia hosted an intimate dinner, a trap dressed as hospitality. Eliza arrived in a simple dark blue gown she'd altered herself from a cast-off, fitting her perfectly despite its plainness. Cordelia seated her beside a visiting French diplomat, the Vicomte de Real, loudly announcing that he spoke almost no English, a certain guarantee, she assumed, of 2 hours of humiliating silence. Eliza turned to him and greeted him in flawless, fluid French, she explained without embarrassment, from a refugee priest who'd sheltered at St. Agnes's in exchange for extra bread rations. The Vicomte lit up with delight. For 2 hours they discussed continental politics with an ease that left Cordelia, understanding not a word, staring in mounting horror. Gabriel watched from the far end of the table, hiding a slow smile behind his wine glass, realizing with quiet clarity that there were entire dimensions to his future wife he hadn't yet discovered. Afterward, Peter caught her alone in a dim corridor, smelling of brandy, and shoved a heavy envelope against her chest. £500. Disappear before Saturday. Gabriel only pities you, he'll tire of you within a month. Eliza took the envelope, walked to a candelabra, and set the corner alight, watching it curl to ash without flinching. Your family's debts are staggering, Lord Peter, she said quietly. You're offering money that doesn't exist. Keep your bribes. And next time you try to intimidate a woman raised on boiled cabbage and cold baths, bring something sharper than paper. She walked past him without a backward glance. The wedding morning dawned pale and overcast. St. George's was packed to the rafters. The ton had come for blood, expecting to watch a duke marry a beggar in mustard velvet. The doors opened. Cordelia's triumphant sneer died instantly on her face. Eliza wore no mustard velvet. She wore pure ivory silk, tailored with such precision it moved like liquid glass, the neckline modest and elegant, her dark hair swept into a severe twist held with a single silver comb. 3 nights earlier, she'd handed the mustard fabric to Mrs. Aldridge for dust rags and had the loyal estate seamstresses, won over by better coal for their workroom, quietly finish a plain silk gown bought at a fraction of the cost. 300 aristocrats fell silent. Gabriel watched her walk the aisle toward him, feeling, for the first time in years, the exhausted armor around his heart begin to crack. "You look," he murmured as she reached him, "formidable." "We have a war to win, Your Grace," Eliza whispered. "I dressed for it." The reception was its own battlefield. Cordelia's dress trap had failed. She needed a killing blow. Halfway through, Lady Caroline Fenwick, the woman everyone assumed Gabriel should have married, cut through the crowd to stand before Eliza with practiced, performative pity. "So we are the new Duchess," Caroline said loudly, ensuring nearby lords fell silent to listen. "Tell me, Your Grace, is it true you grew up without shoes?" How fascinating, the leap from mud to marble. The room held its breath. Gabriel stepped forward, jaw tight. Eliza stopped him with a single raised hand. "It's true," she said, unbothered, stepping closer. "I had no shoes until I was 7. Walking on stone and frozen earth teaches you how to plant your feet so nothing can knock you down. You, I imagine, have only ever walked on velvet carpets. Lovely, but it makes one terribly soft, and when the ground shifts, those in velvet are always first to fall." She turned her back on Caroline, dismissing her entirely, and resumed her conversation with the Duchess of Devonshire as though nothing had happened. Caroline fled the circle, flushed a deep, humiliated red. Cordelia, watching from across the room, felt the first cold certainty settle over her. She had not brought her son a lamb for the wolves. She had brought him a wolf of his own. The honeymoon was no honeymoon at all, a 4-day carriage journey north to Blackwood Hall, a sprawling limestone estate with 70 rooms and a roof that leaked in a dozen places. By her second morning there, Eliza descended to the estate office, where the steward, Mr. Doyle, greeted her with the patronizing smile of a man who assumed a duchess wanted nothing more than a comfortable chair by the fire. She asked for 5 years of ledgers instead. By evening, she'd found what she suspected. Doyle had sold 300 acres of old-growth timber at half its market value, pocketing the difference, and was overcharging tenant farmers for subsidized seed grain. Roughly £4,000 stolen over 3 years. "Fire him," Gabriel said flatly when she showed him the numbers that night. "Draft the writ." "Already done," Eliza said, sliding the parchment across the desk. Gabriel signed it with a hard, decisive flourish, watching his new wife with something between astonishment and pride. Winter brought Cordelia's counterattack, a letter announcing she was bringing Peter, Beatrice, and 20 guests north for the hunting season, fully expecting the strained estate to buckle under the expense and expose Eliza's incompetence to society at large. "Let them come," Eliza said calmly, over Gabriel's objections. "Turn them away and your mother wins the rumor war instead. We host them, we smile, and we show them precisely who runs this house." For 5 days, the guests tried everything to break the household, demanding hot water at odd hours, sending back perfectly good meals, tracking mud through every room. Eliza absorbed it like stone absorbing rain, the loyal staff executing her orders flawlessly. The turning point came during a sudden blizzard, when a tenant boy arrived half-frozen with news that his family's roof had collapsed under the snow. Eliza didn't send a servant. She pulled on a riding cloak herself. "You cannot go out in that," Beatrice gasped. "Send someone." "A servant can't authorize emergency timber release, or dig a woman out of rubble fast enough," Eliza said, already at the door. "I can." Gabriel caught up to her before she reached the cart, wordlessly climbing in beside her. They fought 2 hours through the storm, braced collapsed beams, and dragged the trapped family free, returning after dark covered in mud and frozen slush, Eliza's hands raw and bleeding. The gathered guests stared in horrified silence as they entered the hall. "My God, Gabriel, you look like Laborus," Cordelia said, aghast. We are, Gabriel said. This is our land. These are our people. If the reality offends you, Mother, the carriages can be readied by morning. He led Eliza past the stunned guests and up the stairs. In their private rooms, he knelt before the fire and washed the mud from her raw hands himself, with a tenderness that undid something in both of them. You ruined your gown, he murmured. It was cheap wool, Eliza whispered. You're a terrifying woman, he said, pressing a slow kiss to her palm. In late February, Peter arrived unannounced, pale and desperate, having discovered, through a bribed clerk at St. Agnes's, that Eliza's mother had abandoned her at the parish gates rather than dying respectably of fever. £2,000, he said, waving a stack of letters, or the whole of London learns the Duke married a discarded bastard. Eliza set down her tea and, without a flicker of panic, opened a drawer and produced her own folder. While you were bribing a workhouse master for gossip, Peter, I was auditing the family trust. Doyle kept meticulous duplicate receipts, £15,000 funneled from your sister's dowry, straight into your card debts, over 4 years. He's currently in a debtor's prison, singing quite freely in exchange for leniency. I also purchased your outstanding notes from the syndicate you owe in Covent Garden. You no longer owe them, Peter. You owe me. Peter went the color of spoiled milk. You'll burn those letters, Eliza continued evenly, pack your things, and board the ship to the Indies I've already arranged passage for. Half your wages there will go toward repaying Beatrice's trust until it's settled. Return to England before then, and I hand every ledger to a magistrate. Gabriel, listening from the doorway, said only, the carriage leaves within the hour, Peter, and watched his brother flee without another word. He crossed to Eliza afterward, pulling her against him with fierce, wordless gratitude, and kissed her like a man finally setting down a weight he'd carried alone for years. By spring, London expected the disgraced Blackwoods to hide. They did not. Eliza returned to society wearing the recovered family diamonds, rescued from a pawnbroker's vault with money she'd saved over the winter, and dismantled Lady Harrington, the season's reigning tyrant, in a single quiet exchange about her husband's failing shipping investments, offering a private loan with a smile that made clear exactly whose debts Eliza now controlled. The final blow came at the Blackwood Spring Ball, when Cordelia paid the parish master, Mr. Crabtree, to publicly humiliate Eliza in front of 600 guests. He arrived reeking of gin, loudly announcing their shared history to the stunned ballroom. Eliza didn't deny a word of it. Instead, in front of the assembled peerage and the Prime Minister himself, she calmly recited the crown stipends Crabtree had embezzled from starving children for years, coal money, bread money, all of it, and asked a nearby magistrate, pleasantly, whether the penalty was hanging or transportation. Crabtree fled the ballroom in terror. Cordelia melted into the crowd, her final weapon shattered. A minor disruption, Eliza said smoothly, raising her champagne glass. Shall we open the supper room? 2 years later, Blackwood Hall no longer resembled a dying estate. The roof held. The tenant farms thrived under crop rotations Eliza had implemented. Cordelia had relocated quietly to Bath, unable to bear a house where the servants answered to Eliza before anyone else. On a crisp October afternoon, Beatrice, humbled and changed since Peter's exile and her mother's retreat, appeared in the estate office clutching a marriage proposal from a man Eliza knew to be managing his estate directly into bankruptcy. I don't want to marry him, Beatrice admitted. But I have no money of my own until I'm 25. I want to understand what you do with the numbers, so I never have to marry a fool just for a roof. Eliza slid a blank ledger across the desk. Sit down. We'll start with compound interest. If you cry, I'll throw you out. Beatrice smiled, a real one, and pulled up a chair. Later that evening, Gabriel found them there, watching his wife teach his sister how to dismantle the financial cages built by men, before Beatrice excused herself for tea. You're turning my sister into a mercenary, he said, amused. I'm turning her into a survivor, Eliza corrected. A woman who understands fractions is entirely immune to bad poetry. Gabriel crossed the room, took the quill gently from her fingers, and leaned down until they were eye to eye. The roof held through last night's storm. The harvest surplus came in exactly as you predicted. He studied her, the ink on her fingertips, the unshaken line of her jaw. "I love you," he said, plainly, the way a man states gravity. "I know," Eliza whispered, pulling him down to meet her. They had not been given a fairy tale. They had built something sturdier, forged in ledgers and blizzards and quiet, ruthless survival, and it had never once let either of them fall. If Eliza's cold, brilliant dismantling of everyone who underestimated her gave you chills, give this video a like and subscribe to Eternal Chapters for more intense, grounded historical dramas. Let me know in the comments, which moment was your favorite, buying out Peter's debt, or the public unraveling of Mr. Crabtree at the ball? And don't forget to share this with someone who loves a heroine who fights with ledgers instead of tears.